So how are you doing in the book of Revelation? A little better than you thought. Some of you were scared. Well, honestly, some of you, it's the first time you've read it. You've read books about the book, but you've never read the book. You've gone to conferences about the book, but never actually read the book. Never trusted that you would have the wherewithal to understand, at least emotionally, if not intellectually, the message that he's trying to get to the early churches. So sometimes we discredit ourselves. Sometimes we do not trust God and His Spirit, the Spirit that searches the deep things of God that we're told, that can make things known to us and give us insight, and especially application of how it would affect and encourage our living. I remind people that this book was written to encourage, not to frighten. We always think, oh, the book of Revelation, oh, that's a real scary book. It wasn't written for that purpose. It was given to the early churches to make them stronger in the midst of a very frightening situation and circumstance. And anytime the church undergoes persecution, the book of Revelation circles back to the top of the preaching list. Everybody has their own personal canon. That is those books that we have underlined and those books that are favorites of ours. And one of the things that we have to guard against in our planning of preaching is that we just don't preach our favorite stories over and over. So sometimes when you say, why did they pick that? One of the reasons is we did it just to challenge the preaching team. You know, we did the whole series on the minor prophets this past summer because a lot of our preaching team had never spent any time in the minor prophets. So that was kind of the fun things, to throw them out there in the deep water there and watch them struggle with those great themes. Let's remember that the book of Revelation was written to encourage 7 particular churches. The churches that are listed in the Asia Minor. Okay, here's your first test. Who are the 7 churches? First one, Ephesus. Second, Smyrna. Smyrna is the second one. Third one, Pergamum. Fourth one, Thyatira. Fifth one, Sardis. Sixth one, Philadelphia. Seventh one, Laodicea. Which has been your favorite one? Laodicea? Is it because it's the most familiar, or the application?
The application of your lukewarm. Get with it.
I would feel better. It's interesting that Jesus tells Laodicea, I would feel better if you were my enemy. At least I would know. Make a stand one way or the other. Who else? Philadelphia? For what reason? Yeah, see? Not only to 7 churches and congregations, but each of us as a church, as one of the congregations, and that reading these letters to the churches sometimes is more like looking into a mirror. And it's like, eesh, that one's a little close. And of course, according to where you are in your life journey, what you're dealing with, these applications will change and the truth will be applied to your life in a different way. What has been the number one where you go, man, I didn't know that about the book of Revelation? You've learned nothing in all our time together. That's disheartening. Need to give you the questions. I'm not going to give you the questions ahead. I try to get my teachers to do that. They wouldn't do that either. Book of worship. Yeah, it is written by a man leading worship to worshiping communities about whom to worship. And as we'll see tonight in chapter 4, one of the first things he does is set it in the context of worship. Somebody else. Standing at the door knocking. We've always heard that in the context of a hard-hearted sinner. Open your door. Yeah. And he's standing at the church door. Now, when I was growing up in in Alabama, the African American pastors told a story. This is one of the favorite stories of the African American pastors in the 60s and 70s when segregation, especially segregation among churches, was the issue. That this man was walking along the road early Sunday morning, and Jesus came up on him and said, "Son, why are you crying?" He pointed to the church. He said, "That big white church, they won't let me in." Jesus said, "Don't worry about it. They won't let me in either." So, okay. Now, we always have to remember that no matter what part of the book we're talking about, this book was written to 7 churches. So we have a tendency to read the first 3 chapters and then lop them off, put them back on the shelf, and then read the other chapters as if they had nothing to do with the first 3. Okay? We forget that all the tales of the beast and all the talk of the dragon and all of the scorpions and all of the helicopters that you see on the charts and everything were all still written to these 7 churches. The letter is always to these congregations. This letter is always to the churches. So don't disconnect. We have a tendency to kind of versify the Bible, in that we do not read the Bible in chunks. We do not read the whole letter together. We'll read like this chapter or this verse, or we'll pick up where we hear Paul saying, "Therefore," not understanding that to get what he says after that, you have to understand what was before, or the therefore doesn't make any sense. So understand that chapter 4 comes after chapter 3, or John wouldn't have had chapters at all. But the story of him being invited into the throne room of heaven and before the throne of God himself was intentionally placed right after the warning to the church at Laodicea. Was intentionally placed right after the last warning of "He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches." Okay? He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches, and bang, the next thing that happens is you're in the throne room of heaven. Why? Why? A couple of reasons. One, if you do not understand the rest of the book in the context that it is happening before the throne of God, at the feet of God, in chapter 5, there is the story of the scroll. In chapter 6, that scroll is opened and the future is unfolded, but it flows from the throne of God. Okay? The Lamb unrolls the scroll, it rolls out. Everything in the scroll then begins to happen, because in the Hebrew language, when God speaks, it happens. There is no difference. The word is dabar, which means action. And so when God speaks, it happens. When God created, he spoke, it happened. So when God speaks the words of the scroll, when the scroll is revealed, it happens. Okay? So you have to understand that everything in this book is under the authority, under the control, and from the throne of God. Second, the church lived in a very, very dark time. And because of that, they were growing accustomed to living in the shadows. What was one of the reasons that they had such a hard time discerning truth from error in teaching? Because when there's not a whole lot of light, you have a hard time determining depth. You have a hard time determining placement, shape, what it is, what it's not. Your imagination has a way of filling in the gaps. And you remember when you were a kid, There were things living under your bed, and there were things living in your closet because you saw something in the shadows and your creative little mind filled in the gaps. And all of a sudden you had monsters. I thought an alligator lived under my bed. And to this day, I will not sleep with my hand hanging off the bed. Now, you can tell me there was no alligator. I'm going to tell you I've got both hands. So that's just, y'all do with that what you want to. Okay? So, what do you do if you want to be sure that everybody can see? You walk into the sanctuary, it's dark. What do? You turn on the light. This is what you're going through. This is the pressure you're under. This is the darkness that's oppressing you. So instead of, as you and I would, this is what it looks like, here's where the beast is, here's kind of stuff. No. We're going to look at the beast. We're not afraid of the beast. We're going to face the dragon head on. We're not afraid of the dragon. But before we do any of that, what are we going to do? We're going to turn on the light. And so he says, let's step into the throne room. And the number one descriptive of the throne room is what? Light. Light. Light that I cannot see its source. Light that I cannot tell you where it came from. I can tell you the general direction. I can tell you how it sparkled. I can tell you how the jewels made the light dance. But I wasn't strong enough. My eyes weren't good enough to see through the intensity of the light to see whom the light came from. The light is a descriptor. Okay? I looked at the sun, and you can look at it for just a little bit, but you'll turn away. Throughout Scripture, this testimony of God when he appears is light. The opposite of God's presence is darkness. Okay? What is darkness? The absence of light. Okay? That's why hell is described as a dark place. The absence of light. Now, let's look at what he does. So what is it that the seven church need? The seven church need a light. So he introduces us and brings us to the throne room of heaven. There are 11 verses here. Let me read them. And after this I looked, and there in heaven was an open door. The first voice that I'd heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." And immediately I was in the Spirit, and there in heaven a throne was set. One was seated on the throne, and the one seated looked like jasper and a carnelian stone. A rainbow that looked like an emerald surrounded the throne. And the throne, around the throne were 24 other thrones, and on the throne sat 24 elders dressed in white clothes with gold crowns on their heads. From the throne came flashes of lightning, rumbles, and thunders. Burning before the throne were 7 fiery torches, which are the 7 spirits of God. Also before the throne was something like a sea of glass, similar to crystal. In the middle was around the throne was 4 living creatures, covered with eyes in front and in back. The first living creature was like a lion. The second living creature was like a calf or an ox. The third living creature had a face like a man. And the fourth living creature was like a flying eagle. Each of the 4 living creatures had 6 wings, and they were covered with eyes around and inside. Day and night they never stopped saying, "Holy, holy, holy, Lord God the Almighty, who was, who is, and who is coming." Whoever the living creature gave glory and honor and thanks to the one seated on the throne, the one who lives forever and ever. The 24 elders fell down before the one seated on the throne and worship the one who lives forever and ever, cast their crowns before the throne and say, "Our Lord and God, you are worthy to receive glory and honor and power because you have created all things. Because of your will, they exist and they were created." Oh, I hit the little button. Which one did I hit? There we go. Y'all ready for me to mess up tonight, weren't you? Oh, not to know it. It is difficult for us to understand the authority and the power of a throne room because we have grown up in American democracy. Even if we were summoned before the president, even if he called us to the White House and we walked into the Oval Office, and everything about the president is to show American power, American status and dignity, everything about that office. My college roommate was on the crew of Air Force One. And he loved being on the crew. I said, Rex, what's the best part of this job? And he said, calling an airport like Nashville and saying, the president will be landing at 2 o'clock. We don't care what you've got going. We don't care who's scheduled. The president will be landing at 2 o'clock. Deal with it. Okay? And when they would roll in, and he told me about one time when they were in Moscow. And you may not know this, but there are 2 Air Force Ones. And the first one flew in, and they pull it over there and hide it in case something happens with the president's plane. He gets on the other plane, and the crew stays, and they work it out. But they flew the first one in and hide it, and then you have the Majestic come in with the president's landing. And he was standing next to an Army general. And the Army general started laughing. And Rex said, what are you laughing at? He said, didn't you hear the Russians behind us? He said, well, yeah, I heard them, but I mean anything. He said, we just won the Cold War. He said, how do you know? He said, the guys are cursing and saying these Americans have 2 of everything. Okay? That was the goal. That was the goal. The man who is on this plane has the power of the United States with him, behind him, in front of him, over him, and under him. You do not threaten the president, you threaten the United States. Okay? So everything about the office, everything about the White House, everything about the way you go into that office is to remind you, he's president, you're not. Okay? Same with the king. Everything about that room, everything about the palace, everything about the way he's dressed reminds you that he's the king and you're not. Now, we don't get this, that a movement of his eye, a raised eyebrow, a little swap of the hand, and a soldier standing next to him would step in front of you and kill you. You would fall dead to the floor. They would drag your body off, and nobody would say, I don't think you should have done that, king. He could take your property. He could take your daughters to be his wives. He could take your wife to be his wife. He could take your sons and put them in his army or call them to his servant. He could take everything you had and you not say anything about it. You had no rights. It was the absolute authority, the absolute reign of the king. So most people decided the best thing to do was stay away from the king, because there was only 2 reasons to go there. One, he was going to give you a big award, or he was going to kill you. That was pretty much it. Okay, so nobody wanted to go there. So you stayed away. So this open door and this invitation to the king was not necessarily good news to John. Okay, what happens when God encounters somebody? What's the first thing that happens? They pass out. John's already passed out twice in this book. I fell like a dead man, okay? People fall out. I'm not worthy. I'm a sinner. Peter says to Jesus, depart from me. I'm a sinful man. You know, your being here cannot be good news for me. The one thing you're confronted with is that God is holy. That means other, not us. He is unlike us in every way, and we cannot stay alive in his presence. He told Moses, I will walk by you. You can see my face. You can see my back, but you can't see my face and live and tell anybody about it. Okay? God has that kind of power that his presence, just being there, short circuits the human being. Okay? So this John may have some kind of trepidation of, ooh, okay, what's going to happen when I go in? And he encounters the divine light. He goes into the throne room, told to go there, and then this is what must happen next. Now notice how John tries to describe what he sees, this presence of God. What you see in the rest of this chapter is John going above, 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 above. Okay? Where does he get this beautiful imagery? Your first thing is, what an imagination. This man can make up an incredible story, and he can pull together some of the most beautiful poetry that's ever been written. I mean, just to read this language out loud is dramatic and strong and powerful. How did he do this? Answer, he didn't. Okay? Every one of these pictures listed in chapter 4 comes from the Old Testament. Every one of them. Okay? He is not creative. He is pulling things that he knows, that he's been taught. This is how God has revealed himself to this person. This is how God has revealed himself to this person. Quick note, we can only talk about God in ways that he has revealed himself. We can't think God up. We can't describe God. The only way we grasp his reality is by understanding ways that he has revealed himself to us. God comes to us. We don't go to God. God has pursued us. Okay? The good news of the gospel is not that you can get to God, but God has come to us. He reveals himself in creation. He revealed himself in the story of the people of Israel. He revealed himself in the prophets. He reveals himself in the scripture. He revealed himself ultimately and supremely in Jesus Christ. But one of the arguments for God is if we were going to think of God up, this is not the God we would think up. He is too unlike anything we have known in human experience for it to be something that we would come up. Okay? Now, let's have a little fun. Where does he come up with these stories? What's the first one, or one of the first ones? Well, the first one, if you're going through the Bible, if you're starting in Genesis 6 is the story of Noah. What part of this picture is from Noah? Rainbow. I'm glad I didn't have to stop and go back on that one, but I've learned not to assume. What's the interesting fact about this rainbow? It's complete. It's finished. Have you ever seen a rainbow's end? Have you ever been driving out west or somewhere and just seen the rainbow go and just not? We did that one time when we was on that tour out west I told you about. We were out somewhere in the middle of nowhere, driving, and the parents just said, oh, there's the rainbow's end. And there was no pot of gold. And so my dad told me we must be at the wrong end of the rainbow. So that's kind of our family story. We're always at the wrong end of the rainbow. What we see as incomplete, what we experience as not yet finished, in the presence of God is finished. The rainbow is complete. That's in Genesis 8. This is the sign of my covenant, that I won't destroy the earth like I did the first time, that there'll always be a place of hope. And in that place, the first thing you see is that everything God is trying to do is now complete in his presence. Moses. What is from the story of Moses? Hint, there are 7 of them. There is fire in this before the throne. Now you would think with all of this light, the last thing we would need would be 7 torches. Okay? But you think about all of the stories that we have in the Bible where God appears as fire or where fire initiates his presence. You have Moses at the burning bush. You have Elijah who called down fire from heaven. On and on the stories go. These seven, the complete Spirit of God, the tongues of flame that appeared on the heads of the church at Pentecost. See, all of these things of where God appears, this Spirit that makes known the presence, that makes known the will of God, that is so powerful that when you encounter this fire, you walk away from that moment more afraid of God than you are of the enemy you must face. Moses leaves the mountain and goes and faces the most powerful man in the world at the time, Pharaoh, and tells Pharaoh to let the slaves go. He is more afraid of God than he is of Pharaoh. John and Peter are arrested for preaching the resurrection of Jesus Christ. They tell the Sanhedrin, we have to do what God tells us to do, not what you tell us to do. We're more afraid of God after the experience of fire than we are of you. Okay, the symbol of God's complete power, the revelation of his people. Isaiah chapter 6. Okay? In the year that King Uzziah died, right? I don't hear any Bibles flipping. You cannot read Revelation unless you flip. Okay? You got to be doing this all the time. Oh, we're sliding. We got the digital stuff now. I'm trying to get used to all this stuff. People reading the Bible on their phone and e-readers and all this other kind of stuff. As far as I know, you got the New York Times up. So, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and lifted up, the throne room. Isaiah's response, woe is me. The Hebrew there is that's a very poetic translation of that. A better translation would be, help me, I'm sunk. Okay? I am a nasty man, and I come from a whole line of nasty people. Okay? Again, in the presence of God, the first thing Isaiah is made aware of is his own sinfulness, his smallness. He has the encounter where the coal is brought to his lips by the angel. He is purified, his sins atoned for. Then we know what happens. God says, who will we send? Who will go for us? And Isaiah doesn't know where, doesn't know to whom, doesn't know what he's supposed to do when he gets there. He simply knows, I'm more afraid of God than whatever is outside that I'm going to have to face. There was a book written several years ago called Your God is Too Small. And the writer or preacher makes the point that most of us have put God into a little box that is too small to handle the struggles of life. So when it gets to real tough times, we do not have the courage to believe that he can help us. So what happens in this moment is that Isaiah has a real understanding of who God is, same thing that John has. Ezekiel, the book of Ezekiel is referenced several times. And when you begin to flip over in Ezekiel, as he is prophesying to the people again, in very, very difficult times, we see this image of God and the seraphim and the angels with the wings covered with eyes. So all of these things are from the Old Testament passages. Ezekiel is filled with them. You cannot read the book of Revelation without reading the book of Daniel. If you don't read the book of Daniel beforehand to kind of get a taste for apocalyptic literature, then you will read the book of Daniel literally by flipping back all the times that the book is referenced in the notes for the book of Revelation. And again, this is again where we see these wonderful creatures that worship in the presence of God. And the first thing we're given is the worship of creation. All of nature sings the praise of God. Over and over again, we see the beauty of the artist. There are things that are in our world that are beautiful for no practical purpose. We understand that male birds have the plumage to attract the female. We understand that other animals are decked out the way they are to attract in the mate. But we do not understand why the sunset is beautiful. There's no reason for it other than to stop us in the middle of the day and remind us that there's a big world out here and a big universe out here. There are surprising clues that there was some kind of intent going on. The Fibonacci numbers. Are you familiar with the Italian mathematician Fibonacci, who came up with a series of numbers that you get the next number by adding the two previous numbers together? And you end up with a pattern, a geometric pattern that defines things like the swirling pattern of sunflower seeds. That's on the scale of the Fibonacci numbers. The spiral of a galaxy is on the Fibonacci numbers. DNA, Fibonacci numbers. And this Italian mathematician with way too much time on his hands figured all of this out. Okay, he could see the pattern. And we see it all the time. Over and over again, we're seeing not how disconnected our world is, by how interconnected the world is, and how we see some kind of energy moving to move the world to its appointed purposes. One of my continuing arguments with my friends who do not believe is that we do not see things get better by themselves. According to them, all of this has just happened, and this is the way the world is, and we get better all the time. I have never seen that happen. And anything, you put a piece of paper in your front yard, it does not become a novel. It melts away. Rain takes it back to its fiber. It goes to its essence, its core, its basic makeup. We have argued a long time about what happens if you had 1 million monkeys with 1 million typewriters. One of them would type Shakespeare. Do you know a zoo in England tried that? It put a bunch of computers into the monkey cage. They didn't type. None of them. Not only did they not type Shakespeare, they didn't type at all. And there was several paragraphs of what these monkeys did to and with these computers. Typing was never mentioned. Okay? I can leave it up to your zoo imaginations there for you to fill in the gaps. Okay? That just doesn't happen. Okay? Because of that, then John tells us is that one of the things that happens here is that creation recognizes the presence of its maker and responds to his presence with praise. This spontaneous praise of when God makes himself known, creation shouts back. We also see the reaction of creation in the thunder and in the earthquakes, this constant unsteadiness. Another word of glory is weight. Okay, so one of the reasons that God gives us the first commandment, you will have no other gods before me, is not because of God's ego needs, okay? Here's why. All of the commandments are given to us out of mercy. When you talk to scientists, they will talk to you about something having an atomic weight, okay? And once it has the atomic weight, it has to have enough weight to be able to kind of generate a gravity. And when it generates a gravity, then it will hold the things around it in the proper orbit and perspective. Jupiter has more atomic weight than Earth, so it can hold more moons in its orbit. The sun has more atomic weight than Jupiter because it can hold Jupiter in its orbit, but Jupiter can't hold the sun in its orbit. So what God is saying to us is, listen, I'm the only being that has the atomic weight to be able to be in the center of your life, to hold the rest of your life in its proper orbit. If you put anything or anyone in the center of your life but me, then your life won't hold together. Your life will spin out of control. Okay? That's why we have that first commandment. Now, the weight of God in heaven, the glory of God in heaven, and you almost hear and feel heaven itself straining to hold the weight of this glory. The death of Jesus on the cross, earthquake, creation straining to hold the glory of the cross. See how these symbols are not new. Mount Sinai. The people were afraid of the mountain. Why? Because there was constant earthquakes, constant thunder and lightning, and they were afraid. This is the symbol again. See, nothing here is new. This is the way God has always made himself known. This is one of the reasons that when somebody teaches, the test we have doesn't line up with Scripture. Because God is amazingly consistent across the generations, across the years, across the centuries, even when dealing with different personalities. We can tell John from Paul. You can tell their writing styles are different. But the truth that they can bring to us is dead on. Okay? So worship responds. Then we have the worship of creation expressed in the four creatures. And everything of creation is captured symbolically in the presence of these four creatures. Man is the pinnacle of God's creation. Man was created on the sixth day. The word here is humanity. One had the face like a man, symbolizing humanity. On the sixth day, this was the apex of the creation. This was the crowning moment of our creation. The eagle, the greatest of all of the birds, symbolically. The ox or calf, depending on your translation, the greatest and strongest of the domestic animals. The lion, the greatest of all the wild beasts. All of these are symbolically bringing all of creation before God. Now, let's look at something here real quick. Remember I told you that the good news of Revelation is that John shouts back to the seven churches, I've seen who's on the throne, and it's Jesus, not Caesar. Okay? Notice who is worshiping the throne. All of these other symbols have been used in various ways as symbols of countries and powers. Okay? What does human secularism tell us? That man is the center of it all. And that we are the reason that we figured out, we give it meaning, and we're it. And it begins and starts with us. Guess what? Human beings aren't on the throne. Okay? Going the wrong way. We have the eagle. Nazi Germany used the symbol of the steel eagle, the iron eagle. America uses the symbol of the eagle. Not on the throne. The ox, strength, the glorification of strength and power, Rome, not on the throne. Lion. How many kingdoms or how many kings describe themselves as the lion? Not on the throne. In attendance to the throne, but not on it. These angels surrounding had 6 wings. That means they can fly any way they need to fly, and they're covered with eyes. They can move any way they need to move. They can get anywhere they need to get, and they see everything. They miss nothing. The proverbial eyes in the back of the head, eyes all over. They are then surrounded. They break out into song, the 24 elders. Where do we get the number 24 from? 12 tribes of Israel, 12 apostles. Trivia question. Name the apostle who took the place of Judas. Yeah, Matthias. Acts chapter 1. Okay? Symbolically, all of humanity. Okay? All of humanity. We've got all of creation praising God. We have all of humanity praising God. These 24 elders dressed in white with golden crowns. They all have their own throne. They all have their own little kingdom. Notice what happens. The Greek word for crown, do you know it? Stephanos. Stephanos. Beautiful word play here by John, because he could have used another word. Another word for crown in Greek is, come on, you sing it all the time. Bring forth the royal diadem. See, your Greek scholars didn't even know it. Okay? He uses the word Stephanos. Why? Think, Greek scholars. Pardon me? The victor's crown. But who is the first victor of the church? Stephen. Stephen, hear it? Hear it? 24 people. Each of them had their own Stephen. See, each of them willing to pay the ultimate price to follow Christ. What's that telling those 7 churches? If you want to be in the throne room of heaven, you have to be willing to walk the valley. You have to be willing to go through your own Gethsemane to where you fall and say, your will, not mine. You have to be willing to pick up and bear your own cross. That's who's there. That's who has the crown, the 24 Stephens. So, Laodicea, lukewarm, you're not here. You're going to have to make a choice. The others, deciding in and out, whether or not you will follow Jezebel, they're not here. Whether or not you'll follow the teachings of Balaam, you're not here. Ephesus, you're not here. You need to pick up the crown of Stephanos. See, isn't that a beautiful little hint to these 7 churches and to you and me? They have these crowns. They respond by bowing down. What are those moments where you drop to your knees? Most of the time, overwhelming grief. Most of the time, when you see somebody collapse, it is in a spontaneous reaction to the news they've just heard, and I don't know what to do with it. I can't stand up under it. Okay? I have never had a spontaneous collapse of joy. Okay? Now, maybe if the guys came in with a publishing clearinghouse, maybe I would have that. I don't want it to be the lottery. That would be problematic for me. Some people ask me, say, you ever play the lottery? Come on. I said, no. I said, when you're out of town, you get a little gas somewhere. Like, no. They said, why? I said, I would win the thing. That's why. That'd be my luck. I'd buy like $1 ticket, and I would win it. But I wouldn't win enough to where I could go somewhere and never have to see you again. See, I'd win just enough to be on the front of the paper and lose my job and everything. That'd be all I could get. I've never had a spontaneous collapse of joy. Now, I've seen it. I have seen it when a friend of mine came home from Vietnam and his mother didn't know he was coming. And when he walked into church that morning, she fell down and collapsed. And just spontaneous joy. I've never been there. Okay? That's this. So overwhelmed by the beauty and goodness of God, they can't stand it. And they collapse under the joy. This is not a forced bow before me or I'll kill you. This is a overwhelming collapse of joy. And they bow down, and then they do something else. They throw the crowns at his feet. Do you know the symbolism? If you were conquered by Rome, you were paraded to Rome. And you were made to walk down this long aisle wearing your crown of your country. And then you'd be forced to kneel in front of Caesar and take your crown off of your head and put it on his feet. The crown that you had been wearing as a symbol of your people and authority is not worthy of Caesar's head, only for his feet. And you were there be made to declare that Caesar is Lord. Okay, that's the picture that he has when he's given this picture. So all of the tribes of Israel, all of the apostles, all the tribes of the world, every tongue, every nation, every ethnic background, bows down, takes the authority of their own lives, the symbol of their own decision-making, the ownership of their own lives, and places it at the feet of Jesus and proclaims, Jesus is Lord. Jesus is Lord. How many of you saw at some time or another in your life the pamphlet of the 4 spiritual laws? Did you ever see that? You remember on the last page there was the picture of the two thrones, and one of the thrones had you on your throne, and the other one had God on the throne. And so the big question was, who's on the throne of your life, and wouldn't you want to put God on the throne of your life? This is this moment. Who's on the throne of your life? Who makes the calls? Who owns you? And the response is, so the response of creation is worship. The response of humanity is worship. The difference here, and it's in one little word, because. Because you are worthy, because all of creation exists in your will. The thing that sets us apart from the rest of the creation is that we understand why. The most important question for us as humans is why. If you know the why, you can put up with just about any how or what. But what drives us over the edge is when we can't find why, when we don't find the meaning, okay? Is pain always bad? No. There's the pain of childbirth, okay? We know the why, okay? But sometimes if you hurt and you don't know why, then that drives you batty. And when the doctor finally says, okay, you got a bone spur on your spinal column that's nicking the nerve, that's causing the pain, and we're going to have to do 8 hours of surgery, you're almost relieved, right? Oh, good. You found something. Now I know why. Okay, and by the time you get back to your friends, the bone spur is this big. And, because I know why. We understand why. And that's the uniqueness of the relationship between us and God, humanity and God, and creation and God. Creation is here by the will of God. Because of your will, you created it, and it stays in place. It is His choice. The decision is here because He wants it to be here. Now just think about that. We've all had that thing, well, if I could have anything I wanted. Okay? God has anything He wants, and what He wants is creation, because creation is the place where we have the relationship with Him. Worship is a must. Did you notice what didn't happen here? We always have this thing that, boy, when I see Jesus, I'm going to ask Him a whole bunch of questions. He's going to tell me why there are mosquitoes. I'm going to know why. And I have a long list of people that God should have dealt with and He didn't, and I want to know why. Did you notice that nobody asked those questions? Did you notice that? Nobody dares look up. Job challenges God. You've been unfair to me. I'm going to die. you want to come make it right and I won't be here? He says that. I'm going to die, I'll be dead, and you're going to come and say, Job, I'm sorry, but it'll be too late, I'll be dead, you won't be able to do it. And then you're going to be embarrassed in front of everybody. Okay? And, you know, it's a wonderful, and then God shows up. And what does Job say? Nothing. The rest of the book is God saying, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? What do you think of the ostrich? You can't catch him. When you catch him, you don't know what to do with him. Okay? You can't ride, you don't know what to do with a horse. He's stronger than you are, faster than you are. He laughs at battle, runs on ahead. At the end of the book, Job simply says, I shut my mouth. See, God shows up, the questions are answered just by the presence of that. Worship is a must. It is the response of the people. It's not something that you casually do. And where you look at your schedule and say, well, let me see what else is going on the Lord's day. Let me see what else I can work in on this day. If you know who God is, then that knowledge alone drives you to worship. It is the center of the believer's life. Everything we are, everything we can do, everything we know, everything we dream about, everything we hope for comes out in and through the worship experience. And this is the center of this book. And this is why, because of who God is. Now, it's always the same response. Always people falling down. Always people acknowledging the overwhelming greatness of God. And the reason some of us have so much struggle in our very dark world is because worship has become a casual experience for us. One famous writer wrote that we should not hand out hymn books when you come into worship, but that we should hand out safety helmets and demand everybody strap in the pew. We should give you safety instructions at the beginning of every worship like they do in an airline. Because as Annie Dillard reminds us, what in the world would we do if God actually showed up in our worship experience? How dangerous and terrifying that would be if he did. See, this is a must. And the very idea that we would have Christians in America who would say, whether or not I go to worship, whether or not. John was on the island of Patmos by himself. What's the first thing he tells us in the book? It was the Lord's day. I went to church. John, you're there by yourself. You're in exile. I'm going to church. Why in the world do we think in the church in modern America, when we have this kind of casual attitude about worship, that we're going to make a difference in the darkness around us? There's always the same response. Now, why did John tell this to the 7 churches? Because you can't stand the rest of the book if you don't know this. You can't stand up in front of Caesar and take the pressure you're going to take if you don't know this. You can't deal with what you have to deal with in postmodern 21st century America if you don't know this. Why is it placed here? Because now Jesus has talked to the 7 churches. He has their attention. He has confronted most. He has consoled all of them. Now that we know where you are, we are now making the decision to move forward. And here's what forward looks like. These are the things that must happen after this. And you understand it as coming from the throne room of God. Now, the question comes to us. Seeing the response of creation, seeing the response of the 24 elders, hearing the response of the 7 churches. Chapters 4 and 5 go together, and we'll talk about this some next week. Chapter 4 is a response to God in worship as creator. Chapter 5 is about the response of us to God as redeemer. They actually go together. What is the response once you know in whose presence you now are, and the wonder and the holiness and the power? Creation is here simply because God wills it. He wants it, and it is. And so we're left here at the end of chapter 4 with this slight pause before we get to chapter 5, where John gives you a chance to kind of catch your breath and see if you're wise enough to respond as all of creation has and as the 24 elders already have. And with that, I'll leave you, and we will see you next week. Let's pray together. Wow. We read these words and we wonder how John stood it. How trying to take in the wonder of all of this, that he just didn't give up and say, I saw it, but I can't tell you. I was there, but I don't know how to explain it to you. How grateful we are for his struggle and for his faithfulness to this experience. How grateful we are that you would visit this little bitty island and that you would take time to show John so John could write it down. And after all of these years, hand it to us. So we can walk out in our dark world, in our political correct world, in our growing anti-Christian world, and be more afraid of you than we are anybody else. Give us power, oh Jesus, to live with that kind of courage. Amen. See you next week.